aphantasia, the mind without a canvas. Close your eyes. Picture your childhood home, the creak of the floors, the smell of old wood, the warm sunlight spilling across the kitchen table. Picture your favorite childhood toy. The worn edges, the soft textures, the colors faded by time. Now imagine none of it is there. Not even the faintest flicker of an image. Just darkness. A silence deeper than silence. This is not a fleeting moment. This is a reality called aphantasia. Aphantasia is the inability to summon images within the mind's eye. For those who experience it, thought is stripped of its visual skin. They know their memories exist. They can describe a place, recall a person's name, even feel the emotion of a moment. But they cannot see it. The theater of their mind remains a darkened stage, empty, silent. To most, this concept feels almost alien. We so often live in the holograms of memory, reliving vacations, daydreaming of futures not yet born, painting dreams across the inner walls of our minds. But for those with aphantasia, the act of imagining is different. It's not a movie. It's a thought, a concept, pure, abstract, uncolored by form. Imagine recalling a loved one's face not through their smile, not through the light in their eyes, but through facts, the color of their hair, the way they once made you feel, the sound of their laughter, but no image, no frame. It's as if memory exists in a dimension of knowing without seeing. And yet, in this darkness, there is brilliance. Because aphantasia doesn't erase creativity, it simply reroutes it. Painters, musicians, writers, some of the most extraordinary minds have lived without visual imagination. They build from blueprint rather than vision. They construct feeling into form, emotion into structure. They map the unseen using senses beyond sight. And here, in this absence of imagery, a question quietly emerges. If the mind can live without pictures, then what exactly is a memory? Is it an image, a story, or merely a feeling, a vibration of existence without form? Stretch this thought further. If some minds are born without a canvas, could other, stranger cognitive forms exist? Consciousnesses tuned not to imagery, but to textures of energy, to patterns of time, to architectures of emotion we have yet to comprehend? Perhaps in the universe's vast spectrum of being, human perception is just one thread in an unimaginable tapestry. Perhaps aphantasia is not a limitation, but a glimpse into how varied, how flexible, how alien consciousness itself can be. Scientists still debate the causes, neural differences, brain wiring, unseen mechanisms in the visual cortex. Yet, beyond biology, aphantasia reminds us of something deeper. That the mind is not a single instrument tuned to a single frequency. It is a symphony of possibilities. And some symphonies we may never hear. When we dream in images, or so we believe. But what if dreams could also exist without pictures? Entire lifetimes lived in the mind, built not from shapes and faces, but from pure thought and pure feeling. A life remembered not through images, but through gravity, texture, meaning. The world of aphantasia is real. It's quieter, perhaps, but it's also richer in ways we might never fully grasp. Those who live without a mind's eye teach us that there are other ways to imagine, to remember, to create, to be. So tonight, when you close your eyes and summon an image, a sunset, a city skyline, a face you miss, pause for a moment. Marvel at the privilege of sight inside the mind, and honor those who walk among us, quiet architects of a world shaped not by vision, but by a deeper, unseen knowing. Because sometimes the most profound imaginations are born in darkness. Imagine walking through a crowd. A man brushes past another's shoulder. A woman scratches her cheek. A child trips and skins their knee on the pavement. Now imagine every one of those sensations is your own. You don't empathize. You don't imagine. You feel it. The sting of skin splitting open. The heat of friction on a stranger's neck. The throb of a bruised ankle that was never yours. This isn't fantasy. This isn't metaphor. This is a rare and real condition called mirror touch synesthesia, a neurological echo chamber where the boundaries of self dissolve. For most of us, seeing someone touched activates only thought. We understand it. Maybe we flinch, maybe we relate. But for those with mirror touch synesthesia, the brain doesn't just process what it sees. It becomes what it sees. A slap on screen sends a tingle through their own cheek. A hug across the room presses into their ribs. The world is not a spectacle. It is a collision. The phenomenon is rooted in a structure known as the mirror neuron system. Yeah, an internal mechanism designed for empathy and imitation. It allows infants to mimic, adults to learn, and societies to bond. But in mirror touch synesthetes, this system goes beyond empathy. It crosses a threshold and never quite comes back. You see a man limping. They feel the limp. You notice a hand caressing another's face. They feel the fingertips. Now imagine living like that. In a world where every moment becomes contact. A woman watches a film. On screen, a character is stabbed. The audience winces. She grips her own side, breath shallow, heart racing. Because her nervous system doesn't know how to pretend. Another sits in a cafe. Across the room, a couple holds hands. A boy bumps his knee on the table. Smiles, pain, tension, affection, all of it, translated directly, involuntarily, onto her own skin. It's not empathy. Empathy has delay, thought. This happens before understanding. It's pre-conscious. Immediate, uninvited. There is a haunting poetry to this condition, a quiet rebellion against the individual. Where does I end and you begin? If your body mirrors everyone in its view. In the distant future, some theorists wonder, what if mirror touch isn't an error, but an evolutionary preview? What if our species is destined to become sensorially entangled? To share pain, joy, sensation not through language or interface, but directly through neuroempathic convergence. Imagine a civilization where touch is communal, where sorrow is distributed, where one person's healing accelerates everyone else's recovery. Because every nervous system is networked. A biological hive mind, not of thought, but of feeling. Perhaps mirror touch synesthetes are not outliers, but the forerunners of what it means to be post-human. Still, today, it is not a gift, at least not always. For some, the condition is mild, a flutter, a flicker, a shadow of sensation. But for others, it is constant and overwhelming, a relentless, inescapable cascade of borrowed suffering. Public spaces become war zones of unwanted sensation. Physical intimacy becomes a flood of signals. Even joy can overload the system, because it too is contagious. In one case, a man reported that watching someone scratch their eye made his own water uncontrollably. That someone rubbing their shoulder made his skin tingle for hours. He couldn't take public transit. He couldn't attend weddings or funerals. Too many bodies, too much contact, too many strings pulling on his senses, as if he were a marionette in a theater with no stage. And yet, in the quietest corners of their experience, some mirror-touch synesthetes describe something extraordinary. They speak of oneness, of living without walls between bodies, of never feeling alone, because every person they see, in some sense, lives through them. One described love not as emotion, but as shared temperature. Another said joy was like music, played on the skin, by strangers who never knew they were musicians. But how do you live like this? How do you love when every kiss feels like a crowd? How do you protect your own body when it isn't only yours anymore? There is no off switch, no cure, only adaptation, mindfulness, avoidance, rehearsed attachment in a world that never stops reaching for you. Mirror touch synesthesia isn't a disorder. It's not broken. It's just too open, too sensitive in a world built on division. But in a time where disconnection is epidemic, where digital avatars replace real presence, where loneliness becomes a daily language, maybe there's something sacred in a nervous system that still insists, I feel what you feel. Not by choice, not by design, but because we are made of the same thread. And some minds, by accident or by evolution, remember that. Imagine waking up to a quiet morning, the light filtering through your window, the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the voice of someone you love calling your name. Everything appears normal, comforting even, but something is wrong. You can't quite explain it. You look at the face in front of you, the face of your partner, your mother, your child. It's perfect, familiar in every way. And yet, a whisper crawls through your thoughts. This is not them. They smile, they laugh, they remember the same things you do, but behind the eyes, there is nothing. The warmth that once tethered you to this person has vanished. In its place, emptiness. You try to reason with yourself. Maybe you're tired. Maybe your mind is playing tricks. But the feeling only deepens. The person in front of you is not who they claim to be. This experience isn't a fictional trope from some psychological thriller. It is real. Documented, feared. It is known as Capgras delusion. Named after the French psychiatrist Joseph Capgras, who first described it over a century ago, this rare psychiatric condition convinces the mind that someone close, someone deeply loved, has been replaced by an imposter. Not a monster, not a disfigured stand-in, but a perfect replica, and that's what makes it so disturbing. Because the world, to the eyes, remains intact. But to the heart, it is all falling apart. Capgras reveals something profound. That love, recognition, connection are not just logical, visual, or even verbal. They are emotional, silent, invisible. They are felt. And when the emotional current that binds us to another person breaks, our reality begins to rewrite itself. Take the story of a woman, Elena. After surviving a traumatic accident, she began insisting that her husband was not her husband. He looked the same, spoke the same, even brought out old photos, wedding pictures, family trips, home videos. But nothing could convince her. To her, he was a stranger, an infiltrator, someone who had learned her husband's patterns, but not his soul. She lived in fear of him. She slept with the door locked. She told neighbors she was being watched. The man she had loved for decades was now a threat wearing a familiar smile. Capgras can go even further. Some people believe their entire family has been replaced. Others believe that pets, neighbors, even their own reflection are imposters. Some construct complex stories to explain what's happening. Spy rings, alien abductions, synthetic doubles, secret cloning programs. But beneath those elaborate tales is one common thread. The brain is desperately trying to make sense of a world that feels wrong. And in doing so, it creates a version of reality that fits the feeling, even if it doesn't fit the facts. So what causes this? Scientists believe it stems from a disruption between two key parts of the brain. One that recognizes faces, and another that assigns emotional significance to those faces. When that link breaks, the brain can still say, yes, that looks like my father. But it no longer feels like him, no comfort, no connection. And so the mind does what it always does. It seeks meaning. It fills in the emotional silence with story. And the story becomes a delusion. Neurologists often find damage to areas like the right temporal lobe and the amygdala, regions responsible for facial processing and emotional memory. Capgras is most commonly triggered by brain injuries, strokes, or neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's or Lewy body dementia. But its implications stretch far beyond medicine. Because Capgras doesn't just expose a rare condition, it exposes how fragile our sense of reality truly is. It shows us that trust, love, and identity are not fixed by logic, but held together by something softer, something we often take for granted. The silent reassurance of emotion. And when that emotional glue fades, everything starts to crack. Now, here's a question that's quietly approaching our future. What happens when the world around us becomes filled with perfect copies? Digital voices that sound like our loved ones. Artificial faces generated by neural networks, AI personalities trained to replicate anyone we've ever known. Could we induce Capgras deliberately? Could we blur the lines so much that we begin to question everyone around us, even ourselves? In this possible future, Capgras may not be a disorder at all. It may become an adaptation, a defense against a world flooded with illusions, a firewall against deception so convincing emotion becomes our last refuge. The tragedy of Capgras is not in seeing a stranger, it's in seeing someone you love and feeling absolutely nothing. No spark, no pull, no recognition. Just a face, and a gnawing question. Who are you? Capgras invites us to reflect not just on the brain, but on the human experience itself. What does it mean to know someone, to love someone, and what happens when that knowing is erased? Not from memory, but from feeling. So if you can look into someone's eyes and feel the warmth of recognition, the quiet gravity of shared history, be grateful, because for some, that connection has been severed, and all that remains is a stage filled with actors playing parts they never chose in a world that no longer feels real. And for those who live with Capgras, the final question never stops echoing, who is real? And am I one of them? Blind sight, the vision that hides from you. Imagine waking up in perfect darkness, but not the kind where your eyes adjust, not the kind you can blink away. This darkness doesn't come from closed eyelids. It comes from somewhere deeper. A silence behind the eyes. You are blind, but not because of your eyes. They still function, they still move, react, gather light. The retina collects the world like always, but nothing reaches you. The images stop just short of consciousness. And yet, impossibly, your body still sees. Someone tosses a ball and you duck. You reach for a glass and find it effortlessly. You walk through a hallway, avoiding every obstacle. You swear you saw nothing because you didn't. This is not magic. This is blind sight. A phenomenon as unsettling as it is real. It occurs when the brain's visual epicenter, called V1, the primary visual cortex, is damaged, often by stroke or trauma. With V1 offline, the experience of asterisk seeing disappears. No color, no motion, no shapes, just black. But here's the paradox. Not all vision passes through V1. There are older, deeper circuits, remnants from earlier stages of evolution, pathways that route through the superior colliculus and brainstem, systems built for survival, not awareness. These ancient systems still function. They detect movement, they sense light, they navigate, they see, but they do not tell you. One man, known only as TN, suffered damage to both sides of his primary visual cortex. Brain scans confirmed he was completely blind. And yet, when asked to walk down a cluttered hallway, he did, without bumping into a single object. He didn't know how, he didn't understand why, but his body did. This is where the illusion of perception begins to crack. We like to believe that seeing is knowing, that if we can't feel our senses, they're not working. But blind sight tells us a different story. It reveals a terrifying truth. Your conscious mind is not the operator. It's the narrator, a voice that writes the story after it happens. Somewhere beneath awareness, your brain is observing, calculating, reacting. You move around danger you never saw. You shift your weight to avoid collisions before your conscious mind even registers the threat. You aren't the driver. You're the passenger, with a very convincing illusion of control. And this raises a chilling possibility. If your brain can see without you, what else can it do? How many decisions are made before you think them? How many instincts guide you before you choose? How much of what you feel, what you fear, what you know, is already happening in the neural background? Another case, known only as DB, lost vision in the right half of his visual field. He couldn't see anything to his right. But when researchers placed lights or objects there and asked him to guess, he did better than chance. Way better. I don't know, he said, I'm just guessing. But he wasn't. Something inside him saw, something unspoken, answered. Blindsight doesn't just question what it means to see. It questions what it means to know. Your awareness is like a flashlight in a vast pitch-black house. Where you aim the beam, you see. But the rest of the house, the hidden doors, the quiet rooms, still exist. And sometimes, they move without your permission. Blindsight is one of those hidden rooms. It shows us that the line between the visible and the invisible isn't biological. It's perceptual, it's narrative. And it can be broken. To those who experience it, blindsight can feel surreal, sometimes even frightening. Imagine walking through the world knowing you are blind, but feeling your body cheat reality. Reacting, dodging, touching what it cannot perceive. Some might call it a superpower, but for many it's a haunting, like being possessed by your own nervous system, like watching your body act while your mind stays locked in the dark. But perhaps the most unsettling question is this: if we can see without awareness, how much of life are we missing? Are there faces in crowds that stir something unspoken? Emotions triggered by shadows we never consciously noticed? Are we navigating a world built mostly on unseen calculations? The brain working in silence, indifferent to the illusion of self? Blindsight reminds us that perception isn't everything we experience. It's everything we don't. It's the instinct before the thought, the twitch before the explanation, the memory your body writes without your knowledge. And so, beneath the surface of what you think you see, something else watches, calculates, moves, not because you told it to, but because it always has. Blindsight isn't a failure of vision. It's a reminder that the mind, so sure of itself, so confident in its narration, may be the last to know what the body already understands. Cotard's Delusion. The mind that declares itself dead. Imagine waking up one morning, the world around you unchanged. The hum of electricity, the cool air on your skin, your reflection in the mirror. But something is wrong, deeply wrong. You feel absent, not just numb, not depressed, but gone. Your lungs still fill, your heart still beats, but you know with bone-deep certainty, you are dead. This is not a metaphor, not a dream. It is a real, rare, and chilling psychiatric condition. Cotard's Delusion. Also called walking corpse syndrome. Those afflicted believe they no longer exist. Not as an idea, but as a lived truth. They insist their blood has dried up, that their heart no longer beats, that their organs have vanished. Some believe they've already died. Others that they can no longer die because they are already beyond death. It's more than delusion. It's the erasure of the self, a conscious identity overwritten by oblivion. This condition is not born from fantasy, but from fractures deep inside the brain. Neurological damage, often to the fusiform gyrus or rash amygdala, disrupts the machinery of self-recognition. Suddenly, the reflection in the mirror no longer belongs to you. The voice in your head no longer feels like yours. The world persists, but you do not. One of the earliest known cases, Mademoiselle X, was so convinced she had no organs that she refused to eat. Why nourish a body that is already hollow, she reasoned. She eventually starved to death. not out of despair, but because she believed she was already gone. In a more recent case, a man named Graham C. survived a suicide attempt, only to awaken convinced his brain had ceased to function. He told doctors, "There's nothing there. I'm dead." And in a chilling twist, his brain scans mirrored his belief, showing metabolic activity as low as someone in a vegetative state. It's as though the brain, convinced of its death, was slowly fulfilling its own prophecy. People with Cotards withdraw from life. Why speak? Why eat? Why breathe? If you're no longer among the living, and yet they walk, they blink, they occupy space, trapped in a purgatory between life and non-life. But what causes this fracture? In many cases, Cotards emerges from the depths of severe depression, when emotional numbness corrodes into existential erasure, when the mind, overwhelmed by emptiness, declares its own nullification. Other times, it's triggered by trauma, psychosis, or injury, especially in areas of the brain responsible for facial recognition, emotional feedback, and identity integration. It's not merely forgetting who you are, it's believing that you were never there in the first place. Cotards reveals something unsettling: how fragile our perception of existence really is. If a small shift in the brain's circuitry can erase the self entirely, then what is consciousness? What is identity? Are we nothing more than an illusion, held together by electrical whispers in fragile tissue? This disorder isn't simply a medical anomaly, it's a philosophical riddle brought to life, a living demonstration that selfhood is not immutable, but woven from threads that can fray and unravel. It also raises a deeper, more terrifying question. If your mind tells you that you're dead, can anything truly bring you back? Treatment exists: antidepressants, antipsychotics, even electroconvulsive therapy, but the process is slow, painful, and often incomplete. Graham, after years of therapy, began to function again, but even then, he described himself as half dead, as though part of him had stayed behind in that invisible realm where identity and oblivion blur. Cotard's delusion doesn't just haunt the afflicted, it reveals the vulnerability in all of us, the tightrope we walk between belief and biology, between what is real and what the mind insists is real. It challenges our understanding of what it means to be alive, not just to breathe or speak or move, but to feel alive. To know with quiet certainty, I am here, I exist. Because if the mind can delete that truth, then what else might it erase? And if one day the voice inside you goes silent, if the reflection in the mirror no longer looks back, who will be there to tell you? You're still alive? In the end, Cotard's isn't just a disorder. It's a DoorDash, a terrifying glimpse into the fragility of identity, the illusions that hold us together, and the quiet horrors that dwell in the mind's darkest corners. The sound of silence, auditory hallucinations in the deaf. Imagine a life lived in total silence, not the kind we chase for peace, but a silence so complete, so uninterrupted, that even your own heartbeat feels distant. You were born into this silence, never hearing laughter, music, voices, never knowing what sound is. And then one day, without warning, you hear something, a whisper, a melody, a full symphony rising from nothing, rich, layered, alien, yet unmistakably sound. This is not fiction, this is reality for many who have never heard before. It is known as auditory hallucination in the deaf, or musical ear syndrome. An experience where the mind, starved of sensory input, begins to compose its own soundtrack. A voice that has never been heard. A piano that has never been touched. A soundscape constructed not from air and vibration, but from pure thought. Meet Emily, deaf since birth. She had never known the tone of a voice, and yet one day she heard her name, whispered from the silence. Then full sentences, conversations, arguments. She was alone, but not in her mind. Or Mark, also deaf from infancy. He described hearing violins, brass sections, entire orchestras rising and falling in concert. Melodies he had never been taught, rhythms he had never felt. Where did these sounds come from? How could the brain produce an experience it has never known? The answer lies within the vast, untamed wilderness of the human brain. When deprived of input, the auditory cortex, that vast neural stage where sound is processed, doesn't go dark. It improvises. It lights up with spontaneous activity, firing patterns that coalesce into something extraordinary. It's as if the brain, desperate for stimulation, begins to whisper to itself. But what's astonishing is the coherence. These hallucinations aren't just noise. They have structure, emotion, meaning. Even more mysterious, these experiences are shaped by culture, memory, and imagination. A deaf person raised watching orchestras feels the rhythm, sees the rise and fall of instruments, and the brain, ever the alchemist, converts those visuals into sound. The music becomes real. Some hear beauty, others hear torment. For some, these hallucinations are symphonic. For others, they are relentless, shouts, screams, static. Auditory experiences that cannot be turned off, only endured. What's happening isn't madness, it's adaptation. A demonstration of why neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to remap, rewire, and reinvent itself. We are taught that perception is passive, that we receive the world as it is. But this phenomenon shatters that illusion. Perception is creativity. Even in silence, the mind speaks. This leads us to a deeper, more philosophical question. If the brain creates the sound, is it any less real? Is sound defined by its origin or by its experience? If Mark hears a symphony born entirely within his mind, is that less authentic than Beethoven's Ninth? Or is it more? Because it's a private concert, composed, conducted, and performed by his own subconscious. Now imagine a future, one where brain-computer interfaces evolve to the point where we can share these internal soundscapes, where the music within a deaf person's mind can be streamed directly into another's perception, where artificial intelligence helps refine and stabilize these hallucinations into transmittable art. What once was private becomes public. What once was silence becomes the next evolution of music. But this future brings unsettling implications too. If we can simulate sound perfectly within the mind, why limit ourselves to external reality at all? What happens when internal perception becomes more vivid than the world around us? When dreams sound better than truth? These hallucinations expose the illusion that reality is fixed. They remind us. We do not perceive the world as it is. We perceive it as the brain interprets it. And in absence, the brain creates. Therapists and scientists now see auditory hallucinations in the deaf not as delusion, but as narrative. The brain's way of telling its story. Without words, without noise, but not without voice. Treatment doesn't aim to silence these experiences, but to give them context. To give the person agency over what they hear. Because it's not just the experience of sound that matters. It's how we relate to it, how we frame it, how we understand it. To hear music without ears, to imagine sound without memory, to create sound in a world where silence has always reigned. This is not a disorder. This is humanity's most haunting and beautiful ability to transform absence into art. So the next time you put on your headphones, close your eyes and listen not just to the music, but to the silence in between. Because somewhere in total silence, another mind is composing something extraordinary. And it sounds like nothing you've ever heard. Chronostasis, the second that was never real. Have you ever looked at a clock, and for just a moment the second hand refused to move? It lingers, still, as if time itself pauses to catch its breath. Then suddenly, motion resumes, and everything feels normal again. But that moment, that pause wasn't real, or rather, it wasn't reality as you think you know it. It's a cognitive illusion, a glitch in consciousness. It's called chronostasis. From the Greek chronos, time, and stasis. Standing still, chronostasis is the strange moment when the brain plays editor. You shift your gaze, and the world delays its arrival. Most of us first notice it with clocks. You glance at the ticking second hand, and it seems to freeze. But the truth is deeper and far stranger. This isn't just a visual trick. It's not a bug. It's a feature of the human mind. A consequence of how your brain constructs reality. Because that's what it does. It doesn't record time. It builds it. Your brain is constantly overwhelmed by raw data. Light, color, sound, motion. But all of it arrives with lag, noise, delay. And so, to give you a sense of stability, your brain doesn't show you the world in real time, and it shows you a version, edited, cropped, smooth, during a rapid eye movement called a saccade. Your vision actually shuts down. You go blind for a fraction of a second, but you don't notice. Because your brain quietly deletes those black frames and paints over them with something that should be there, something that makes sense. And when your eyes land on something rhythmic, a ticking clock, a swinging pendulum, a blinking light, your brain fills the gap with something else, time period. It stretches that first moment just a little, just enough to hide the edit, and that's why the second hand appears frozen. Not because time has stopped, but because your brain is stitching together a version where it never missed a beat, only it did. This illusion doesn't end with clocks. It happens when you glance at a moving car, at a friend's face, at your phone screen, every day, hundreds of times. You live through moments that never really happened. Moments your brain rewrote just to maintain the illusion of smooth experience. Think about that. You are not living in the now. You are living in the reconstruction of the now. Let's take it further. Imagine a pilot scanning instruments, a basketball player switching from teammate to hoop, a driver checking mirrors. Every one of these shifts includes a blind second, a moment the brain erases, fills, and extends without the body ever noticing. The illusion is so perfect, you forget there was ever a cut. Chronostasis reveals that time is not absolute, not in perception, not an experience, it's elastic, stretching and snapping back, just beneath the surface of your awareness. But what if this wasn't just an isolated visual phenomenon? What if the brain uses the same mechanism? In other ways, experiments show similar effects with sound. A sudden beep you didn't expect. It feels longer than it actually was. That means chronostasis might be a multisensory glitch, a built-in pause, a silent extension of reality across all inputs, a universal delay camouflaged as continuity. And now, we begin to ask darker questions. If the brain can rewrite a second of your visual timeline, what else can it rewrite? Memories, feelings, entire conversations? Is your nostalgia just a chronostasis stretched across years? Is déjà vu a playback error in your cognitive timeline? Is your grief just a slow motion frame the brain refuses to let go of? Now let's step into fiction, but not far. Imagine a technology that lets you manipulate chronostasis to extend the first second you experience someone, to prolong connection, to pause pain, or worse, to weaponize time perception. Make seconds feel like minutes, minutes like hours, a psychological eternity forced into someone's mind in a flash. Now imagine this ability, not as a machine, but as an evolved trait, a future human, able to warp time subjectively. Not just in memory, but in awareness, a species where time bends differently for each person because each brain is tuning its own reality. And suddenly, we are not living in the same moment at all. Chronostasis, then, is more than an illusion. It is a reveal. A moment when the mind slips, and we catch a glimpse of the edit. A second not lost, but invented. A second we never truly lived, but felt anyway. And once you've seen it, you start to wonder how many other seconds were stitched together. How much of your life has been reconstructed just to keep the story intact? So next time you glance at a clock and the second hand seems to hesitate, remember, it's not the world that stopped, it's you touching the edge of the illusion. And behind that frozen tick is the reminder that what you call time is not a constant. It's a narrative, one carefully edited by a brain that's always just behind the moment, trying to convince you it never was. Pareidolia, faces in the static. You're lying in bed, eyes tracing the ceiling. A crack curves just so. A sliver of plaster becomes an eye. Beside it, a stain stretches into something like a mouth. And suddenly, the ceiling is staring back at you. You blink. The illusion fades. But for a moment, it was real. A face, a presence, watching. This moment, strange, fleeting, quietly magical, has a name. Pareidolia. It's not a glitch. It's not madness, it's a window into the architecture of the human mind. Pareidolia is the tendency to see familiar patterns, especially faces, where none exist. A rabbit in the clouds, a man on the moon, a screaming skull in the grain of old wood, a divine presence in a slice of burnt toast. But this isn't just whimsy. This is survival disguised as imagination. Thousands of generations ago, our ancestors faced a world of shadows and rustling leaves. If the pattern in the bushes might be a predator, it was safer to assume it was. False positives kept you alive. False negatives didn't. And so the brain adapted. It began to favor meaning over randomness, pattern over chaos, signal, even when there was only noise. That instinct lives on in us today. You've seen it. Every time you glance at an electrical socket and see a startled little face. Every time a drip of condensation on a window starts to look like eyes. Every time a shadow on the wall becomes something else. And the effect isn't just visual. Sometimes it whispers. You hear your name in the wind, music in the hum of a refrigerator, a hidden message in the static of a detuned radio. This is auditory pareidolia. Your brain, desperate to decode chaos into something coherent, reorganizing sound into language, emotion, presence. But why? Why are we built this way? The answer lies in the deep recesses of your mind, in a region called the fusiform face area, buried in your temporal lobe. This part of the brain is specialized for detecting faces. It lights up even when there is no face, just two dots in a line. Eyes, a mouth. That's all it takes. It's why emojis work, why cartoons evoke real emotion, why shadows and patterns make us pause. Because we don't just see faces. We expect them. We create them. And from that instinct, art is born. Ancient cave painters may have traced animals they thought they saw in the natural curves of rock. A stain became a horse, a crack became a spear. The spark of imagination, ignited by pareidolia, may be the same fire that lit the first creative flame in the human species. Designers, filmmakers, even advertisers tap into this deep code. Horror films lace shadows with ghostly outlines. Logos mimic eyes, symmetry, familiarity. We trust what we think we recognize, even when it isn't real. But this phenomenon walks a delicate line. In moments of fear or stress, pareidolia can turn protective pattern seeking into anxiety. A shape in the fog becomes a stalker. A creaking house becomes haunted. A whisper becomes a warning, and in some minds, this never stops. For those with certain neurological or mental health conditions, pareidolia can become invasive, persistent, unrelenting, faces in the walls, eyes in the shadows, voices in the static. What was once survival becomes a feedback loop. The brain, always looking, begins to see too much. Yet even in its eeriness, there's beauty. Pareidolia is proof that our minds are not passive observers. They are active participants in shaping the world. We take what's random and write stories into it. We turn smoke into signal. We extract gods from clouds and ghosts from wallpaper. Because perception isn't just reception, it's interpretation, it's creation. A face in the moon, a voice in the silence, a figure in the fog. These are not errors. They are echoes of something ancient inside us. A mind built not only to survive, but to imagine. And in that imagination, we don't just see the world. We find reflections of ourselves in it. So the next time you stare at a wall and think you see something staring back, don't dismiss it. Acknowledge it for what it is. Your mind, millions of years in the making, still reaching into the chaos and finding meaning, still turning static into signal, still drawing faces in the noise. Selective mutism, the voice that lives in silence. You're standing in a crowded room. Voices buzz around you like electricity. Laughter flutters. Questions float. The world is alive with sound. You have something to say. A thought, a response, a simple yes. Your mind is clear. The words are ready, but they never leave. Your lips part and freeze. Your throat tightens. Your lungs ache. And then silence. Not because you chose it, but because something inside you did. This is not shyness, not hesitation. This is selective mutism, a deeply misunderstood condition where the mind is fully awake, but the voice is locked behind invisible bars. It's not a decision. It's a system shutdown. The voice is there. You can hear it, but something won't let it escape. Picture a child named Emma. At home, she's radiant, a symphony of words. She sings, jokes, tells stories, with the kind of unfiltered joy only childhood can hold. But each morning, as she walks through the school doors, the world changes. Her voice dims, her laughter vanishes, her silence takes hold. She watches her classmates play, wants to answer the teacher's question. But her body refuses. Inside, a storm of thoughts rages. Outside, stillness. This is the cruel paradox of selective mutism. Awareness without action, intelligence without expression. It's not a refusal to speak, it's the impossibility of it. And that impossibility is powered by fear. At its core, selective mutism is an anxiety disorder, a defense system built in the brain's ancient machinery, the amygdala. When triggered, the brain floods with stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, as if the simple act of speech were a predator. And the body responds the way it always has: fight, flight, or freeze. This isn't behavioral, it's biological. And in selective mutism, freeze wins. Imagine Alex, a teenager. With friends, he's loud, funny, brilliant, but in class, he's mute, not by choice, by reaction. His mind composes perfect answers, but his voice never follows. Teachers misread his silence as resistance, indifference, defiance. But inside, Alex is screaming, begging to be heard. Selective mutism often begins in early childhood, between ages 2 and 4. But if left untreated, it can follow someone into adulthood, quietly shaping friendships, careers, love, and self-worth. Imagine living a life where your ability to speak flickers on and off, based on setting, context, people. Your own voice becomes a stranger to you. And yet, so often, those living with selective mutism are misunderstood. They are told to try harder. They are accused of being stubborn, of being difficult, of seeking attention. But the silence is not theatrical. It's not resistance. It's not manipulation. It's terror with no visible wound. we often underestimate. The emotional damage silence can do, not silence chosen, but silence imposed, because selective mutism is a prison. That only reveals itself from the inside. The world sees a quiet child, but that child feels invisible, invalidated, unseen, and with each unspoken sentence, the weight grows heavier. But not all is stillness. There is hope, with patience, with empathy, with the right kind of support. Selective mutism can be unlocked, one whisper at a time. Consider Maya. She begins with a whisper, not to her teacher, but to her mother in the corner of the room. Then she whispers to a friend, then to her teacher, then to a group. Each whisper is a crack in the wall, each word a step toward freedom. And slowly, through trust, through practice, through compassion, Maya speaks. Selective mutism is invisible to most, but that does not mean it is rare. It simply means we haven't learned how to listen for the words beneath the silence. Because silence isn't empty, it's full of thoughts, of hopes, of unspoken emotions banging against glass. In a world obsessed with volume, we often forget that quiet can be a scream. Selective mutism shows us the raw power of anxiety, the fragility of expression, and the deep, aching need to be understood. But it also shows us something else. It shows us that speech is not just a tool, it's a form of liberty, and silence, when it's forced by fear, becomes a kind of exile. We must remember those who do not speak often have the most to say. So the next time you encounter a child who doesn't answer, a teen who avoids conversation, an adult who hesitates to speak, don't push, don't punish, don't assume, look deeper, because behind that silence might be a voice waiting for a key, a nervous system stuck in protection mode, a person desperate to connect. Selective mutism isn't about unwillingness. It's about inability. But also, it's about potential. And when that voice finally returns, however soft, however slow, it is not just sound. It is a victory, a triumph of safety over fear, of understanding over judgment, of connection over silence. And in that voice, we hear something extraordinary, the sound of freedom. Confabulation, the memories that never were. You remember it vividly. The sound of waves crashing against the shore. The way the sun warmed your skin. The laughter of someone you love echoing through the breeze. It feels real. It is real to you. But what if it never happened? This is the strange, invisible force of confabulation, where memory becomes imagination, and the mind quietly scripts its own stories, convinced of their truth. But this isn't lying. There's no deception, no manipulation. It's the brain doing what it always does, filling in the gaps to preserve the illusion of a coherent self. When pieces of memory vanish, the mind weaves its own reality in their place. And it does so flawlessly, with sights, sounds, emotions, all invented yet deeply believed. It often begins in the wake of trauma, neurological conditions like dementia, brain injury, or Korsakoff's syndrome. A mind trying to keep its narrative intact, even as the facts begin to fray. Take Michael. After a severe accident, he recounted to his doctors a beautiful weekend at the beach with his brother and niece. The color of the sky, the laughter, the sand between his fingers. But none of it ever happened. He had no brother, no niece, no beach. Yet his brain told him otherwise, and he believed it with all his heart. Margaret, living with dementia, described dinners with old friends, weddings she never attended, trips she never took. Each tale filled with warmth, joy, and complete fabrication. To her, they weren't hallucinations. They were memories. Moments she lived. Confabulation is the mind's quiet defense mechanism. When memory retrieval falters, when the truth is inaccessible, the brain steps in, not with silence, but with story. And it's not limited to the severely ill. You've done it. We all have. That childhood story you love to tell, corrected by a sibling. That heartfelt moment you remember one way while someone else insists it never happened. The details feel authentic, but your memory lied. Or rather, created. Our brains aren't recorders, they're storytellers. Each recollection is a reconstruction, colored by emotion, shaped by belief, altered by time. Memory is not truth, it's an evolving fiction. But if memory shapes identity, and memory is fragile, then who are we, really? What if the person you believe you are is an elaborate narrative stitched together from moments both real and invented? Confabulation reveals a terrifying possibility, that even our most cherished, confident memories may be fiction. And in the courtroom, where memory is treated as fact, this phenomenon casts a long shadow. Eyewitnesses, sincere, honest, can unknowingly testify to events that never occurred. Entire lives altered by memories that feel real, but are not. Still, the brain does this for a reason. To protect you, to preserve the story of you, even if it has to write new chapters. Like a dream you didn't know you were dreaming, confabulation walks the line between reality and imagination. It builds identity, continuity, and coherence at the cost of objective truth. But maybe that's what it means to be human. To be made of stories, not all of them true, but all of them ours. So next time you share a memory, no matter how vivid, pause and wonder how much of it was real and how much was a beautifully convincing fiction authored by your own mind. Fregoli delusion. When everyone is the same stranger, you walk into a room. The barista smiles. A co-worker nods. Your friend waves hello, but something's off. Behind each smile, each glance, there's a strange echo. A whisper that tells you, that's not them. It's him. It's always him, Dot. You don't know how you know. You just do. They've changed faces. Again, this isn't fiction. This isn't paranoia. This is Fregoli delusion. A rare and haunting fracture in the mind, where one person becomes everyone. Strangers, loved ones, even your doctor, all masks, all part of the same actor's endless performance. To those who live with this delusion, it's not a theory, it's truth, a sinister kind of clarity. They are being followed, haunted, not by many, but by one. One tormentor wearing infinite disguises, and no one believes them. Named after Leopoldo Fregoli, a 19th century Italian actor known for his lightning-fast costume changes, this condition doesn't play out on stage. It plays out in the mind. and it rewrites the rules of identity. Most of us trust our perception. We recognize faces, assign intention, gauge emotion. We feel familiarity not just with our eyes, but with something deeper, an emotional resonance. But in Fragoli, that resonance misfires. A stranger's face doesn't just look familiar, it feels familiar, in the worst possible way. Like a predator you've seen before, like someone you've been running from your whole life, and suddenly they're back, wearing a new face, a new voice, a new excuse. This isn't about mistaken identity. It's about unescapable identity. The belief that one person is hiding inside everyone you meet. That no matter how far you run, they will always be one step ahead. Always watching, always becoming someone else. And the mind, desperate to explain what it feels, builds a terrifying narrative. One where reality itself is a masquerade. Where trust is a trap and every hello might be a lie. The roots of Fragoli often trace back to trauma, paranoia, schizophrenia, or brain injury, particularly damage to the areas responsible for facial recognition and emotional tagging. But what emerges is more than neurological damage. It's a world inverted, where no one can be trusted, because everyone is him. In one documented case, a woman was convinced that 2 hospital doctors were actually her former stalker, switching identities to torment her. No amount of proof could break the illusion. DNA, security footage, rationality, useless. She felt the presence beneath the mask. And to her, that feeling was reality. Imagine that. Being trapped in a world where the most familiar thing is your fear, where your mind takes every kindness and folds it into the same shape, where isolation doesn't come from being alone, but from being surrounded by copies. In Fragoli, every new face becomes an old threat. Every conversation, performance, the coffee shop, the sidewalk, even your bedroom, all part of a stage. And you, the only one who knows the script, is a lie. Treatment is difficult, therapists become suspects, doctors become conspirators, even medication can feel like a trap set by the one who hides behind all others. You try to fight the illusion. But what if the illusion is all you have? What if you are right and no one else can see it? That's the danger of delusion. It doesn't ask for evidence. It feeds on emotion, on trauma, on the primal need to make sense of a pattern too terrifying to ignore. And yet, behind the fear, there is revelation. Fragoli delusion is not just a psychiatric phenomenon, it's a mirror. A reminder that identity, the thing we rely on most to navigate the world, is not as solid as we believe. Our recognition of others isn't just visual, it's emotional, contextual, dynamic. And if that system breaks, everything breaks with it. The terrifying truth Fragoli forces us to face is this. Your mind does not show you the world. It shows you a version of it. Filtered, interpreted, shaped by experience, memory, emotion. And if that filter twists, even slightly, the people you love become strangers. The strangers become ghosts. And the world becomes a hall of mirrors, each reflection wearing the same mask. So the next time you look into someone's eyes, and they feel familiar, too familiar, pause. Because in a reality shaped by perception, even the faces you trust most might not be who you think they are. Jamais vu, the familiar made strange. You're looking at a word you've written 1,000 times. Door, it's just a word. 4 letters, but today, something's off. You stare at it. DOOR. It begins to dissolve. The shape feels wrong. The letters lose meaning. And suddenly, you're not sure what you're looking at anymore. It's as if the word, this anchor of language, has become a stranger. This is not forgetfulness, not confusion. This is jamais vu, French for never seen, the eerie cognitive twin of déjà vu, where déjà vu tricks you into feeling like something new is familiar. Jamais vu does the opposite. It takes the known dash and makes it feel alien. It's walking into your own home and for a breathless second not recognizing it. It's staring at a face you love and something behind your eyes whispers, "This isn't right." Jamais vu is not imagination. It is real. A glitch. A tiny collapse in the neural machinery that maintains familiarity. Scientists believe it stems from the temporal lobe, the region of the brain responsible for memory and recognition. Under stress, fatigue, repetition, or for no clear reason at all, the system falters. And when it does, your experience of the world shifts, like a spotlight turning off, like walking through a perfect set, only to discover it's made of cardboard. In one study, participants were asked to write the same word repeatedly. Door, door, door. After 30, 40 repetitions, many reported the word lost all meaning. It became visual noise, an artifact, a symbol disconnected from its referent. That's jamais vu, a brief fracture in the link between perception and memory, between the world and your sense of it. But in everyday life, it can be haunting. A man walks into his kitchen. Same floor, same fridge hum, same clock above the sink. But today, it all feels wrong. The color of the walls is off. The cabinets seem taller. The smell is unfamiliar. He reaches for a glass, and for a moment, his hand doesn't know the path. He knows he's in his kitchen, but he feels like a guest in someone else's simulation. Jamais vu often appears during moments of stress or exhaustion, but it's also been linked to temporal lobe epilepsy, where the brain's perception engine sputters just before a seizure. In extreme cases, jamais vu spirals into a terrifying state called derealization, where the entire world begins to feel false, like a film set, like a dream someone else is dreaming. One patient described seeing his wife, but feeling like she was just an actress playing her. The room was perfect, the details precise, but something vital was missing. In these moments, you are not losing touch with the world. You are glimpsing the architecture behind it. Jamais vu is a reminder. Your experience of reality is not reality. It's a rendering, constructed in real time by a mind, constantly stitching together memory, pattern, and expectation. And sometimes the rendering cracks. Think about what knowing means, what recognition is. You walk into a childhood room, the walls are the same. Your fingers remember the shape of the desk, but what you're feeling, nostalgia, warmth, grief, those aren't in the room, they're in you. Jamais vu breaks that spell. It strips the world of its history, It leaves only raw perception, cold, unlinked, and uncanny. In speculative thought, jamais vu raises deeper questions. What if familiarity is not just an emotional response, but a protocol? A neural handshake between memory and environment? What if, in moments of cognitive lag, the brain fails to authenticate the world? In those moments, are you closer to the truth or further from it? What if the sense of reality we cling to is just the default rendering setting, and jamais vu is a flicker of something beneath? For those who experience it repeatedly, especially in dissociative states, PTSD, or deep anxiety, jamais vu becomes more than disorientation. It becomes exile. Imagine waking up every day, feeling like the world is new, but not in wonder, in terror, like your memories are forged, like the world is pretending. Some say it's like wearing your own skin, but wrong. Wearing your own face, but not seeing yourself behind it. And yet, jamais vu isn't always a curse, it's also an invitation. A doorway into the machinery of perception, a whisper that says, this world you trust so deeply isn't as solid as it seems. It reveals the fragility of familiarity, the complexity of memory, and the strangeness of simply being. So the next time you look at a word, and it stops making sense, the next time your home feels foreign or your reflection looks like someone else, pause. You haven't lost your mind. You've just slipped sideways, caught a glimpse of the scaffolding behind the stage. You've experienced a fracture in the lens. And for a heartbeat, you saw the raw feed beneath the interface. That moment, unsettling, strange, and fleeting, is jamais vu, not a malfunction, not madness, but a reminder that the mind doesn't mirror the world. It constructs it. And sometimes, just for a moment, the construction fails. Autoscopic hallucination, when your reflection steps out of the mirror. Imagine this. You're alone in your room. The silence hums gently. You're still, present, until something shifts. A flicker of movement in the corner of your eye. You turn slowly, cautiously, and standing across the room just a few feet away is you. Not a reflection, not a trick of light, but your body, your face, your posture, mirrored in impossible detail. A perfect twin. Breathing, watching. This is not a dream, not madness. It's a real documented phenomenon known as autoscopic hallucination. A rare condition where your brain, in some profound misfire, renders you into your own field of vision. You appear externalized, separate, like a ghost of yourself that forgot it was supposed to stay inside. Unlike an out-of-body experience, you're not floating or disconnected, you're grounded, sober, present, but so is your double. It looks at you, reacts to you, breathes with you, and sometimes it smiles. What would you do if your own face stared back, calm and curious, as if waiting for you to understand something you've long forgotten? For some, it lasts seconds. For others, minutes, hours, an intimate haunting. In one documented case, a woman studying alone watched herself walk silently into the room and sit down beside her. Same hair, same clothes, same expression of disbelief. Her double smiled, softly, knowingly, and then vanished without a trace. These are not flickers, not shadows mistaken for movement. Autoscopic hallucinations are vivid, precise. The brain doesn't just glitch, it performs. And that's what makes them so deeply unsettling, because how can you trust your reality when your own mind can render you as other? Neurologists link these hallucinations to disturbances in the temporal parietal junction, a region responsible for integrating body awareness, orientation, and spatial perception. Damage from migraines, seizures, trauma, anything that disrupts this network can cause the self to split. Not metaphorically, visually, bodily, real. And yet, despite medical explanations, the emotional impact remains unfathomable. What does it mean to confront your mirror without the glass? To witness your body detached from your will? Historically, poets and mystics have spoken of doubles, doppelgangers, as omens, as symbols of inner war, guilt, or death. But this is no myth. This is science colliding with something eerily mythic. Take the story of Goethe, the famed German writer who once saw himself riding in the opposite direction along a road. Same clothes, same horse, same self. The memory stayed with him forever. And it begs the question, what part of us leaks outward when the veil thins? Some researchers suggest these hallucinations might be fragments of our subconscious, rendered visible during neural instability. Others call it a breakdown of the body's spatial map, the brain mistakenly placing you outside of you. But science only gets us so far. Because when your own body stands across the room, staring with eyes that are yours, but not quite, there is no language that can explain the unease, no logic that can rebuild what's just cracked, and not all doubles are threatening. Some people report comfort, curiosity, a strange sense of clarity, as if seeing themselves from the outside gave them perspective the mirror never could. But more often, the reaction is fear. Fear that the boundary between mind and world is thinner than we thought. Fear that the self is not a solid core, but a shifting network, fragile and fractured. Fear that consciousness is not confined to the inside, but floats, drifts, echoes, like a signal waiting to be caught. Autoscopic hallucination is not just a neurological anomaly, it is a crack in the illusion of identity. Because if your brain can project a living, breathing you into your reality, what else is it creating without your consent? How many layers of the self are merely stories? How many reflections are we already carrying inside unseen? In labs today, treatments exist, medications, therapy, brain scans, but they cannot erase the existential tremble that follows an encounter with one's double. Because deep down, it doesn't feel like a malfunction. It feels like a message. A moment where the inner self steps forward and says, "You don't really know who you are. So the next time you look into a mirror, pause, breathe, and ask quietly, who's really looking back? And how certain are you that they plan to stay on your side?" The illusory truth effect. When repetition becomes reality. You hear it once and doubt it. You hear it twice and question it. You hear it a third time, and somehow, without even realizing, you start to believe it. This is the illusory truth effect, a hidden force that shapes not just what we think we know, but who we become. The illusory truth effect reveals a profound vulnerability buried deep within the architecture of the human mind. The more often a statement is repeated, no matter how false, the more likely we are to accept it as truth. Not because of logic, not because of evidence, but simply because of familiarity. Imagine scrolling through endless streams of news, social media posts, whispered rumors. At first, you resist, you question. But repetition wears down skepticism like water wears down stone. And soon, fiction hardens into belief. Reality itself bends, with nothing more than the frictionless erosion of the familiar. At its root, this phenomenon is an evolutionary relic. Long ago, familiarity meant safety. A familiar face, a familiar path, a familiar story. It signaled security, survival. In the chaos of a dangerous world, our ancestors learned to trust what repeated itself. But in the hyper-saturated echo chambers of today, that same instinct backfires spectacularly. The illusory truth effect is not rare. It is not an oddity. It is the silent undercurrent shaping every society, every generation. Slogans repeated until they become gospel. Propaganda whispered until it feels inevitable. Urban legends, conspiracy theories, even historical myths, planted through repetition, grown in the fertile soil of familiarity. Think of the myths we still carry. That we swallow spiders in our sleep. That the Great Wall of China is visible from space. Falsehoods repeated so often they bypass the critical mind entirely. The mind, weary of skepticism, surrenders. But why? Because skepticism demands energy. Because critical thought is expensive, and the mind, forever seeking efficiency, often chooses the path of least resistance. Repetition feels like truth, and feeling so often wins over thinking. This is not merely psychological trivia. It is the foundation upon which entire realities are constructed. Advertisers exploit it, politicians weaponize it, movements rise and fall by the drumbeat of repetition. In experiments, subjects shown false claims repeatedly, no matter how absurd, began to believe them. Not because they lost intelligence, but because they lost vigilance. And therein lies the danger. When reality can be rewritten not through force or argument, but through simple, tireless repetition. Truth itself becomes fragile. History bends, identity shifts. Entire civilizations sleepwalk into belief. But awareness is resistance. Understanding the illusory truth effect arms us with the first and most essential defense: doubt. It teaches us to pause when something feels familiar, to interrogate the source, not just the sensation, to question not only the outrageous lies, but the comfortable assumptions we no longer bother to question. Because if we don't, if we allow ourselves to drift into the lullaby of repetition, we surrender our minds to whoever speaks the loudest, the longest, the most often. Yet there is hope. The mind that can be lulled by repetition can also be awakened by reflection, by slowing down, by refusing the easy comfort of familiarity, by demanding evidence where only echoes exist. And if we look deeper into speculative frontiers, into the possibilities emerging from AI, from deepfakes, from synthetic realities, we realize the threat is only accelerating. Soon, repetition won't just alter our beliefs. It could fabricate entire experiences, memories, histories, identities assembled algorithmically, and repeated until they feel not just true, but inevitable. In this future, where reality itself is customizable, the illusory truth effect could become not a side effect of human cognition, but the engine of existence. To resist will require more than skepticism. It will require a new literacy, a vigilance of the mind, an ability to navigate a sea of truths and illusions with both humility and relentless curiosity. Because in the end, the real battle isn't between true and false. It's between remembering and forgetting that truth must be earned, not merely repeated. So next time a familiar claim crosses your mind, stop, breathe, question, because the comfort of familiarity might just be the most beautiful illusion of all. Thought-action fusion. When imagination becomes a mirror. A thought drifts into your mind, uninvited, unfiltered. A violent image, a forbidden idea, a moment you would never act upon, never speak aloud, and yet it lingers. You shake it off, but something inside you recoils, not because of what you did, but because of what you imagined. This is thought-action fusion, a psychological glitch where the boundary between thinking and doing begins to blur. It whispers, if I imagined it, maybe I meant it. If I feared it, maybe it will happen. If it crossed my mind, maybe it's already real. You carry the weight of a crime never committed. You suffer the guilt of a sin that never occurred. You begin to believe your thoughts define you, that darkness in the mind is darkness in the soul. But thoughts are not actions, and imagination is not intent. Still, in this illusion, thoughts gain gravity. They feel dangerous, tainted. They become evidence, unspoken, unprovable, used by the mind against itself. Picture this. You're holding a baby. Suddenly your brain flashes. What if I dropped her? You freeze. You're horrified. You didn't want this thought. You love this child, but the image came. And now, it won't leave. You replay it and avoid holding her again. Not because you ever would, but because you thought it. And the thought feels like guilt. Or imagine kneeling in prayer, a quiet, sacred place, and suddenly your brain screams obscenity, blasphemy. You didn't say a word, but you feel as if you've shattered something holy. You feel dirty, broken, afraid. This is moral fusion, believing that thinking about something wrong is morally equivalent to doing it. There's another kind too. Likelihood fusion. The belief that if you think of something bad, you're more likely to cause it. That your thoughts are spells, that your mind itself is a threat. So you perform rituals, touch the door 5 times, repeat a prayer, whisper an apology to no one. You try to cleanse what never existed, undo what was never done. It's exhausting, and it's lonely, because how do you tell someone, I thought something terrible, but it wasn't me? How do you explain that the worst part wasn't the image, but the shame that followed? This phenomenon is especially common in those with OCD, anxiety, or religious trauma. But fragments of it live in all of us. A moment where we mistake imagination for intention, fear for prophecy, a fleeting thought, for a permanent truth. But here's what matters. The mind is not a moral agent. It generates static. It imagines at random. It creates shadows and lightning without asking your permission. Most of the time, these thoughts mean nothing. They're not signs of who you are. They're not warnings. They're not blueprints. They are weather, passing clouds in the sky of your awareness. And yet those most haunted by them are often those with the kindest hearts. Because thought-action fusion doesn't thrive in chaos. It thrives in people who crave certainty, people who want to be good, people with vivid imaginations and overactive consciences. They become trapped in their own depth, using their thoughts as weapons against themselves. But here's the truth. You are not your worst thought. You are not the sharp flash in the quiet moment. You are not the dark corner of your imagination. You are what you do with those thoughts. You are how you treat others. You are the kindness you offer, the love you give, the compassion you carry, even for yourself. The path to peace begins not by fighting the thought, but by accepting its impermanence. You let it come, you let it pass, like watching a storm from a window. Not inviting it in, it takes courage. It takes unlearning years of fear. It takes knowing that fear without action is not prophecy, and guilt without harm is not truth. So if you've ever had a thought that scared you, if you've ever wondered whether your mind makes you dangerous, know this. You are not broken. You are not evil. You are simply human. And being human means learning to live with the shadows in your mind, without letting them block the light. Exploding head syndrome, the soundless alarm of the mind. You're lying in bed, the lights are off, the room is still, and slowly you begin to slip beneath the surface of consciousness. That familiar, fragile threshold between waking and dreaming, the in-between. And then, bang. Like thunder cracking inches from your skull, like glass shattering inside your mind. You're ripped from near sleep, heart pounding, breath stolen. You jolt upright, look around, but there's nothing, no sound, no crash, no aftermath, only silence. What you've just experienced is not madness, not imagination. It's a real, documented phenomenon. It's called exploding head syndrome. Despite the dramatic name, your head hasn't exploded, but your perception has. This rare and eerie condition affects thousands, maybe millions. And while its name sounds like something from a dystopian novel, it is quietly hiding in the folds of modern neurology. A glitch nestled inside the nightly systems check your brain runs as you prepare for sleep. As your consciousness powers down, neurons shift their cadence. Your brain transitions into sleep mode, reducing sensory input, disengaging voluntary control. But sometimes, something misfires. Instead of drifting gently, your mind triggers a false alarm. It fabricates a blast of sound, a pure hallucination, so vivid, so loud, it feels like the world has ruptured around you. But this alarm doesn't come from your ears. It comes from deep inside your brain. A miscommunication, an echo of an internal process gone slightly wrong. This usually happens during hypnagogia, the transitional state between wakefulness and sleep. Here, the mind walks a tightrope, processing sensory data, managing memories, softening thought. But the neural switchboard isn't perfect. And in that razor-thin moment, the brain sends out a signal, an explosion of perception, not pain, not noise, but a sensory detonation. A psychological thunderclap meant for no one. It doesn't hurt, but it does unsettle, because it violates the trust we place in our senses. You felt it, you heard it, but it was never there. What's stranger still is the personalization of the experience. Some hear a gunshot, others a thunderclap, or a scream, or an alarm. A few describe it as the sound of glass breaking underwater. It's almost as if the brain chooses a signature sound from your personal archive of fear or urgency. Some researchers suspect this is a protective mechanism, a way for the brain to rouse you if it believes something is amiss. But this glitch isn't always born of fear. It can emerge from stress, sleep deprivation, emotional overwhelm, or in rare cases from neurological disturbances like temporal lobe epilepsy or migraines. The common thread? Your brain is stretched, working too hard, overclocked during the hours it should be powering down. And when that delicate circuitry reaches its limits, it sends out a false signal. Not to harm you, but because it thinks you need to wake up. There's a haunting beauty to that. A brain so dedicated to your survival that it creates an explosion, just to make sure you're still awake enough to hear it. But the experience can be traumatic. For some, it repeats nightly. Sleep becomes a minefield. The bed, once a sanctuary, becomes a place of vigilance. You don't fear the dark. You fear the rupture inside it. There's no blood, no physical danger, but the terror is real. And many sufferers find themselves trapped between science and silence. Doctors unfamiliar with the syndrome dismiss it. Friends laugh it off. Just a dream, they say, just your imagination. But how do you explain a moment that felt like reality crumbling around you? Thankfully, there is hope. Exploding head syndrome, despite the name, is harmless. It is not a sign of brain damage, not a precursor to madness. It is a neurological hiccup, often treatable by improving sleep hygiene, managing stress, or in some cases, therapy or medication. But beyond the medicine, there is mystery. What does it mean that your brain can create an explosion out of silence? That it can simulate destruction to warn of nothing? That it can betray your peace without your consent? What else then does it create? What else is whispered in your mind's theater when no one is watching? Exploding head syndrome may be rare, but it's a stark reminder of a deeper truth. Your brain is not a passive observer of the world. It is the architect of your reality, and sometimes it rattles the foundations, just to see if you're still listening. So the next time you're lying in bed and a sudden noise jolts you from the edge of sleep, don't panic. Don't fear the silence that follows. Just know, your mind is still learning where the waking world ends and where the dreaming begins. The traveler's amnesia. When the world forgets you back, you stand in front of the temple. The sky is pale blue. The light brushes stone in a way that should feel sacred. You smile. You take a photo. And then you forget, not immediately, not all at once, but later, weeks, maybe months. You scroll through your camera roll and there you are, smiling, posing, proof that you were there. But it feels like someone else's life, like watching a dream you didn't have. That eerie, empty sensation. It has a name. The traveler's amnesia. It's not clinical. You haven't lost your identity. You remember your name, your flight home, your friends, but the texture of the experience, the feeling, is gone. As if your brain hit skip instead of record. This isn't just jet lag or fatigue. It's a neurological phenomenon. A survival mechanism disguised as forgetfulness. Because your brain isn't a camera. It doesn't capture the world frame by frame. It builds memory through emotion, attention, and repetition. And travel, ironically, breaks all three. During those long haul flights, those border crossings, that sensory flood of languages and signs and currency and food, your brain begins to triage. To survive, it filters for the essentials. The gate number, the hotel code, the exit signs. But the way the wind smelled in the alley behind the cafe, the hush in your chest as you stared at a skyline you'd never seen before, it quietly discards those, not because they didn't matter, but because your brain ran out of bandwidth. This is the strange paradox of adventure. The more novel the moment, the less likely you are to remember it. Your hippocampus, the part of your brain that transfers short-term memories into long-term archives, becomes overwhelmed. It chooses logistics over emotion, orientation over awe. You remember the names of the cities, the order of the museums, the facts, but not the feelings, not the sense of wonder, not the scent in the morning air, not the way the world felt tilted just slightly. New. Some travelers describe it like this: I know I was in Japan, I've got the photos, but I don't remember how it felt. They remember the experience like reading from a guidebook they once held. The story is there, but the ink has faded. And it's not just the novelty, it's the dislocation. During travel, identity blurs. You're not home, but you're not truly there either. You exist in a liminal state, suspended between time zones, cultures, languages, rituals. Your sense of self drifts. You become an observer, not a participant. And when the self is ungrounded, memory becomes slippery. Sometimes the brain chooses not to remember. Not from trauma, but from overload. In a landscape where everything is different, nothing feels anchored. No pattern to highlight, no normal to compare against. And so the mind flattens it all into static, like a postcard with no caption, like a dream without dialogue. Even the most unforgettable trips, those once-in-a-lifetime moments, are vulnerable to this erosion. Why? Because those moments also ask the most of your cognition. You're navigating jet lag. You're solving problems. You're constantly adapting. And while your body adjusts, your brain makes a quiet trade. It says, I will get you through this, but I might not let you remember it. And there's something quietly devastating about that. Because what's the point of going somewhere beautiful if you can't feel it later? So what do? You don't stop traveling, but you change how you move through it. Pause, breathe, smell the air and name the scent. Feel the weight of the sunlight on your skin. Let the silence linger, let boredom stretch. Give your brain space to record instead of constantly asking it to process. Take fewer photos, write how you felt, not just where you went. Let a moment happen and don't rush to capture it, because the camera doesn't remember for you, and neither does your passport. Only present stores memory, and only emotion makes it stick. The traveler's amnesia is subtle. It doesn't erase the journey, it just steals the soul of it. So the next time you're far from home in a place your mind can barely comprehend, slow down. Make the memory on purpose, because your brain may be trying to survive the trip, but your soul came to remember it. The rubber hand illusion. What if your body isn't yours? Imagine sitting at a table, your real hand hidden from view. In front of you lies a lifeless rubber hand, clearly fake, clearly not yours, and yet somehow familiar. A researcher begins stroking both your real, hidden hand and the rubber one, gently, deliberately, in perfect synchrony. And then something strange begins to happen. You feel it, not metaphorically, not imaginatively. You feel the brush on the rubber hand. Your brain begins to blur the boundary between real and replica. The fake begins to belong. This is the rubber hand illusion, a subtle yet profound experiment that exposes a hidden truth. Your sense of self is not absolute. It's a story, and the storyteller is easily convinced. We like to believe we always know where we end and the world begins. That the borders of the body are solid, unshakable, unmistakably ours. But this illusion cracks that confidence, because all it takes is a few minutes of synchronized stimulation, and your brain rewrites the map. Not only does it adopt the rubber hand, it protects it. When threatened with a knife, people flinch. When struck suddenly, their hearts race, skin conductance rises, panic sets in, not for the real hand, for the asterisk fake. Why? Because your brain values coherence above all else. If what it sees aligns with what it feels, it fills in the blanks. It updates the schema. And suddenly, the foreign becomes familiar. The artificial becomes you. But it doesn't stop at hands. Using virtual reality, researchers have projected entire bodies, placing people behind themselves, floating above themselves. When sight and touch are perfectly aligned, participants report an eerie shift, as if their consciousness has left their body altogether. This is more than illusion. It's disembodiment. It's relocation of the asterisk self. And that raises a deeper question, one with no easy answer. If your sense of body can be tricked, then who exactly are you? Are you a biological shell, or just a pattern, updated moment by moment, based on sensory input? The implications are vast. In one version of the experiment, the illusion breaks. The strokes become asynchronous, and participants begin to lose connection with their real hand. They describe it as alien, disconnected, as though it no longer belongs to them. This is the flip side of embodiment, not gaining a limb, but losing one you've always had. The brain, confused by mismatched signals, lets go of ownership. You don't just become something else, you cease to be yourself. And this is not limited to laboratory curiosities. Amputees often feel phantom limbs, not because they're deluded, but because the brain still holds on. It remembers what it once owned, and it aches. Now researchers use illusions like this to rewire that ownership. To ease pain, retrain sensation, reawaken numbness. Stroke victims are using these methods to reclaim parts of their body. Prosthetic limbs are being developed not just to move, but to feel. The future may offer robotic hands that your brain adopts effortlessly. Not because they look like you, but because they respond like you. But here's the deeper, more disorienting truth. If a rubber hand can become you, what else might be accepted? A virtual body? A drone on Mars? A synthetic consciousness? What if identity is just proximity plus feedback? What if the you in your mirror is a construct, stitched together from data your brain interprets on faith? Your sense of self, of ownership, of being, is not hard-coded. It's negotiated, updated, hacked. You think of your body as a boundary, but in truth, it is a suggestion. And your brain, that tireless narrator, will believe almost anything that makes the story smoother. So the next time you look down at your hands, ask yourself, how much of this is real? And how much is just consensus? A temporary treaty between neurons and senses, Because in the quiet corners of the lab, with nothing more than a fake hand and two soft brushes, the brain reveals its deepest secret. It doesn't show you the world as it is. It shows you a version that makes sense, and sometimes, to keep the story going, it turns the impossible into identity. It turns plastic into person, an illusion into self. Hypnagogic jerks. The glitch between worlds. You lie in bed. The day fades behind you. Your breath slows, muscles soften. The room dissolves into a warm blur. Sleep beckons, not as an idea, but as a gravitational pull dragging your consciousness into the dark. And then it happens. A sudden jolt, a violent snap of your leg or arm, a shock that surges through your body like you've just stepped off a ledge, and gravity remembered you. You awaken, heart racing, disoriented. Were you falling? Was it a dream? Or was it something else entirely? This is the hypnagogic jerk, a sudden, involuntary spasm that erupts in the fragile space between waking and sleep. A physiological misfire, or something stranger. Most people will experience this at least once, some more than others, but almost no one knows why it happens. Science calls it a sleep start. But that name feels too simple for something so deeply visceral, so ancient. This phenomenon has persisted across centuries, cultures, and conditions. A universal glitch embedded in the code of consciousness itself. So, what's really going on here? The hypnagogic state, the transition between wakefulness and sleep, is not a single point. It is a borderland, a place where neurons slow, muscles unwind, and the mind begins to dream before the body has fully signed off. In this liminal state, signals get crossed, the body lets go, but the brain, still partly tethered to waking vigilance, panics. One theory suggests that your brain misinterprets your body's relaxation as falling, as if it still thinks you're in a tree, like our primate ancestors, a biological ghost of the past, and so it jerks you back from the brink. A neurological flinch, evolution's last-second lifeline. Another theory ties it to misfires in the reticular formation of the brainstem. This region, responsible for regulating consciousness and motor control, is like a gatekeeper between your awareness and your dreams. But sometimes, just before it shuts the door, a flicker escapes. A misaligned impulse, a burst of static. The result, a full-body twitch, a spark of confusion, and the feeling that reality just slips sideways. There are patterns too. Stress makes them worse, so does caffeine. And exhaustion, strangely, increases the likelihood of them striking just as your body is crying out for rest. But here's where it gets even more mysterious. What if this isn't just a glitch? What if, at the edge of sleep, your brain is doing more than misfiring? What if it's tuning into something else? Sleep is not simply a shutdown, it's a recalibration, a shift in dimensional processing. Some researchers propose that in sleep, the brain tests simulations, runs scenarios, renders false environments to train itself. So what if the hypnagogic jerk is the brain crashing out of a simulation too soon? What if that sudden fall wasn't just imagined, but a failed rendering of a dream you weren't supposed to remember? The sensation of falling might not just be metaphorical. It could be a literal misalignment in the brain's virtual physics engine, a debugging error between your body's sensory input and the mind's simulated environment. In other words, what if, just before you sleep, you fall out of a world the brain was trying to build? And then there's the emotional response. Why does it leave us so shaken? Because the moment of falling triggers something primal. A fear not just of physical danger, but of losing control, of slipping out of the known and into the void. The hypnagogic jerk reminds us that we are never fully in command of our bodies, that even in rest, even in peace, the brain holds its own secrets. For some, these jerks are rare. For others, they are nightly interruptions, moments of micro-panic carved into the stillness. There are ways to soften them. Mindfulness, breathing techniques, a warm routine that coaxes the nervous system into surrender. And sometimes a shift in how you think about them is all it takes. Because maybe they're not interruptions. Maybe they're messages. From your mind to your body, from your waking self to the dreamer waiting just below the surface. A reminder of the boundary you're about to cross. And how strange, how beautiful, how fragile that crossing truly is. So next time you feel that jolt, that sudden fall into nothingness, pause for a moment. Let your fear settle. You haven't broken, you haven't failed to sleep. You've simply touched the edge, the invisible line where reality flickers and the brain whispers, "Not yet." And in that instant, you were awake and dreaming at the same time. Phantom ringing syndrome. A mind rewired by expectation. You're sitting quietly, lost in thought, when it happens. A vibration, a familiar buzz, a sudden jolt of anticipation in your chest. You reach for your phone and find nothing. No call, no message, no notification, only silence. And yet you could have sworn you felt it. This isn't madness. It's a phenomenon quietly reshaping the modern mind. Phantom ringing syndrome. As our lives entwined with technology, the brain adapted in ways we never fully anticipated. Each buzz, each ping, a tiny reward. A microscopic burst of dopamine, a digital pat on the back whispering, "You matter, you're needed, ... Over time, the mind stops waiting. It begins to anticipate, and it begins to imagine. Like a neural ghost limb, your phone, this once external device, becomes a phantom extension of yourself. The brain, wired for survival, now wired for connection, misfires. A brush of fabric feels like a buzz. A passing thought mimics a ringtone. Reality bends under the weight of expectation. Sarah, a 27-year-old marketer, knew this intimately. She felt her phone vibrate dozens of times a day, even as it sat silent. Each phantom buzz stirred a flicker of hope, a flash of anxiety, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, her peace of mind unraveled into fragments of perpetual anticipation. She was not alone. Studies reveal that nearly 90% of smartphone users have experienced phantom alerts. Not occasionally, routinely. We have trained ourselves to hear what isn't there, to feel what isn't real. Phantom ringing syndrome isn't just an odd glitch in human perception. It's a symptom of a deeper fracture. A world where silence, once sacred, now feels dangerous. Where stillness is mistranslated as loneliness. Where being unreachable feels like fading into irrelevance. The brain, primed for constant vigilance, can no longer distinguish true signals from echoes of desire. And the consequences are not benign. Each false buzz triggers micro-stress. Heart rate spikes. Tension ripples across your muscles. A tiny surge of cortisol, too small to notice in isolation, but accumulating day after day into chronic anxiety, restless sleep, fractured focus. And yet we crave it. Each phantom ring is a symbol, a promise, a whisper that somewhere someone remembers us. The danger lies not just in the anxiety, but in the deeper truth phantom ringing syndrome reveals. If our minds can fabricate sensations so convincingly, what else might we experience that never truly existed? How much of our reality is constructed not by experience but by expectation? Could it be that even the lives we lead, the fears we hold, the dreams we chase, are shaped not only by the world around us, but by the echoes we invent within ourselves? But there is hope. Awareness is the first step toward awakening. By silencing unnecessary notifications, we retrain the mind to stop anticipating false signals. By practicing mindfulness, pausing to breathe before reacting, we reclaim the moment. We relearn that silence is not the enemy. It is the gateway back to clarity, to presence, to ourselves. The next time you feel your phone buzz, pause, notice, breathe. Let that phantom ring pass through you like mist. Choose not to chase it. Choose stillness over frenzy, presence over phantom, because true connection, the kind we're wired to seek, will never be found in the endless echo of notifications. It can only be found in the quiet spaces where awareness lives, where life unfolds not through the buzz of a machine, but through the beating of your own heart. In the end, phantom ringing syndrome is not just about technology. It's about remembering what it means to be fully awake in a world that constantly demands we remain half dreaming. The Tetris effect, when patterns rewrite the mind. Close your eyes at night, hoping for silence. But instead, your mind lights up. Blocks fall from nowhere, vivid, geometric, impossibly bright. They rotate, lock into place, vanish. You're not holding a controller, you're not looking at a screen, and yet the game continues in your head. This isn't madness, it's not a glitch in cognition. It's something real, something repeatable. It has a name: the Tetris effect. More than a curiosity, it's a window, a view into how repetition reshapes the neural architecture of the brain, a doorway into how the things we do most often begin to do something back. Originally named for a classic game of falling blocks, the Tetris effect describes what happens when a task is repeated so frequently, so intensely, it begins to invade your subconscious. It manifests in dreams, in micro-imaginations, in the veil between waking and sleeping. You blink and it's there. You rest, and the pattern plays itself. But this effect isn't about Tetris. Not really. It's about any repeated pattern. Stack boxes long enough in a warehouse and the world becomes a game of alignment. Drive the same route every day and your dreams twist roads into racetracks. Spend hours coding and your thoughts take on the rhythm of logic. This is the mind, drunk on repetition, still dancing with the patterns it's been fed. In the 1990s, researchers began to study this effect in earnest. They discovered something uncanny. People who played Tetris for hours reported seeing the game in their sleep. But not just seeing, feeling it. Dreams filled with falling shapes. Hypnagogic imagery, those fleeting visuals that flicker just before sleep, saturated with the pulse of gameplay. Even blind participants who played using touch and spatial sound reported the same experience. The Tetris effect wasn't visual, it was cognitive, it was structural. The brain, ever adaptable, wasn't just remembering, it was optimizing, rehearsing, automating. It was becoming the game. This is procedural memory in its rawest form. the mechanism that lets us ride bikes, type fluently, play instruments. It's the brain learning by doing, until the doing becomes part of who we are. But here's the twist. This doesn't only happen in sleep, it leaks into waking life. Have you ever walked through a grocery store after a long game session and started mentally organizing the shelves? Have you driven after playing a racing game and felt like your reflexes belong to someone else? Faster, sharper, more automatic? That too is the Tetris effect. The pattern persists even when it no longer makes sense, and it's not always gentle. Soldiers emerging from combat simulations report hearing phantom gunfire in their dreams. Musicians feel rhythms in their limbs long after the music stops. Dancers lie in bed and feel choreography echoing through their bodies. Sometimes it inspires, sometimes it intrudes. There's a strange beauty in it, yes, but also something quietly terrifying. Because repetition doesn't just strengthen a memory, it rewires identity. The things we do again and again begin to sculpt how we see. And once we see the world in patterns, we can't unsee them. But what if this isn't just neural efficiency? What if it's a deeper mechanism embedded in consciousness itself? Imagine a universe built on pattern recognition. A simulation that learns from frequency, where repetition doesn't just shape neurons, but reality. What if thoughts repeated often enough don't just change the brain? They change the simulation's rendering of the world around you. A sort of cognitive gravity. Looped attention bending the interface. Could enough mental repetition make certain outcomes more likely? Could reality begin to respond not just to action, but to habit? It's a strange thought. That dreams could be predictive. That behavior could echo across timelines. That the brain, in looping a task, might begin to anchor it outside the mind as well. But even within known science, the implications are profound. Visualization, mental rehearsal, pattern immersion. Athletes use it, artists harness it. Chess masters build entire libraries of intuitive motion, not through guesswork, but through neural saturation. The effect becomes a tool, not just to perform, but to transform. And so we arrive at the deeper metaphor. The Tetris effect is not about a game. It's about life. What you do repeatedly becomes who you are. What you think repeatedly becomes how you see. Every action, every focus, every small habit you let take root. It writes itself into the source code. You are not only made of what you remember, you are made of what you repeat. So the next time you close your eyes and see motion, rhythm, structure, ask yourself, what else has etched itself into your mind? What thoughts have become reflex? What beliefs are being practiced in the background of your silence? Because eventually the game stops being something you play, and it becomes something that plays you. Not because the mind is broken, but because it's brilliant, and because it listens. And every loop you allow, it listens a little more.